We are going to be looking at what chronic shame is, the impact it can have on those affected, and recommended coping techniques for dealing with chronic shame as a result of trauma. Hello, I'm Bodhi from the Kairos System, and you're watching the Kairos Collaborative. We are a dissociative identity disorder system, aiming to share our experiences in our own unique ways. Shame is something that almost all chronically traumatized individuals deal with in their day-to-day lives. This can be exacerbated in those with DID, who may feel shame around ulcers, time loss, and other dissociative symptoms, and deep-seated childhood experiences. Because interpersonal trauma, like any interpersonal connection, is extremely important in the development of one's sense of identity, one's sense of self can come to be laden in pain, and everyday experiences marked by shame for who they are. Shame is also perpetuated by stigma. We're told our pain isn't real or valid if we don't feel shame for it. But we can never start to heal if we don't break free of the shame cycle. I'd like to start with a little preface on the differences between shame and guilt. Shame is a self-defining emotion. It arises from cognitive dissonance, from feeling that one has done something dishonorable. Guilt is a feeling of remorse for an offense. Additionally, shame has a lot more to do with how we see ourselves as a whole, while guilt is more of a feeling towards the actions we have done. Shame is especially important in shaping how we see ourselves and how we deal with the world around us. Shame serves a social function. It allows us to learn the cultural norms of our society and to steer away from behaviors that are deemed culturally unacceptable. It also serves as a self-conscious emotion. This means that it's responsible for dictating how we feel about ourselves and how worthy or capable we think we truly are. These two factors act in tandem with each other. Because our social connections influence who we are, see my last video for more on that, and how we view ourselves determines the success of our social interactions. Psychologist, researcher, and self-proclaimed storyteller Brené Brown believes that shame is a reaction to perceived failures or inadequacies. She says, "I define shame as the intensely painful feeling of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. I don't believe shame is helpful or productive." Shame, then, is best understood as the antithesis of connection. There are various theories to the development of shame, with some attributing it to a primary emotion, especially in a paratraumatic stress reaction. But the general consensus agrees that shame becomes especially developed in toddlerhood. Children raised in healthy homes learn in childhood healthy self-esteem and senses of accomplishment and associations. When abuse or neglect is brought into play, these accomplishments are often ignored or even ridiculed. These children begin developing guilt for the things that they can't do or do wrong, and shame for not being good enough. Many are led to believe that it is their actions that lead to the abuse, or that they will be punished if they decide to speak out. Coupling this with a shift to an internalized locus of control commonly seen in survivors of chronic childhood trauma, and you have the development of maladaptive chronic shame. We can't blame our caregivers for the pain that we feel, because they're responsible for our survival. So we have to continue to attach to them despite constant misattunement. We then blame ourselves in order to maintain a sense of control and safety. Chronic shame doesn't serve social function. It only creates chronic anguish. It prevents the healing that is associated with forming relationships by forcing one to remain ashamed and suffering within oneself. And suffering outside of the healthy, healing confines of connection isn't productive. It only serves to add more pain. Chronic shame has numerous impacts on our physical and mental well-being, and acts as a roadblock to healing in many ways. One big reason it continues to impact us even when the feelings causing that shame are long in the past and we're now safe, is that shame is an auxiliary emotion. This means that it prevents other emotions from occurring, in this case, positive ones. The joy usually felt when you've accomplished something good, or the relaxation of self-care, can quickly turn into, "I don't deserve these things. I'm a bad person. I shouldn't be proud of myself." This is how chronic shame can impede our healing. Maybe we don't even truly believe that we deserve to get better, that we don't deserve the connections necessary to heal, or that we can't reach out because who would care anyway? Chronic shame tells us that we are worthless, unlovable, a failure, flawed, broken. These thoughts are pervasive and harmful. They don't define you. They're not a reflection of who you are. Healing can also be impacted based on shame around dissociative symptoms, the actions of others in the body that one would never do, or losing time when alters switch in and out. The frustration and confusion of not being able to remember is quickly followed by the shame of, why can't I even function properly? Constant flashbacks and anxiety responses make us feel broken. Dissociation, switching, communication can make us feel abnormal. Stigma tells us that we are scary for having these symptoms, and we so rarely see anyone who actually understands. All of these things exacerbate their own everyday shame aside from the chronic shame that can make reaching out for help, even to a therapist, a very frightening thought. Reaching out is also a great deal of vulnerability. For trauma survivors, our vulnerability is something that has been taken advantage of. But vulnerability is also the only way to heal from shame. Shame can also stop us from having empathy for ourselves, leading to devalidating or denying our own experiences. This is because shame is used, much like dissociation, as a way to disconnect from the experience. In fact, research has linked them together. In 2007, Richard Kluft marked unresolved shame as a major barrier to resolving dissociative symptoms. This means that until one learns to heal with shame and the feelings it creates, one can't start to heal from dissociative symptoms. This is part of why safety and stabilization is phase 1 for healing with a complex dissociative disorder. Shame is a method of avoidance from a painful situation. Certain scripts have been attributed to how people go about accomplishing this avoidance. These shame scripts are attacking self, attacking others, isolation, and avoidance of inner experiences. So how can we begin to heal from chronic shame and the negative impacts that it can have on our psyche? It's believed that chronic shame has lifelong effects, but that doesn't mean that coping with it and healing with it isn't very, very possible. Most of the tips I'm going to be sharing are from the amazing skill book, Coping with Trauma-Related Dissociation, but some are taken from our own lived experiences. I recommend listening and seeing what may work for you or may fit your own unique situation, or using what I've talked about to help brainstorm your own ways of coping, or talking to your therapist about tips that they recommend for dealing with chronic shame. Overall, these tips can be summarized by increasing levels of empathy, connection, power, and freedom. Learn to identify feelings of shame and guilt, and any feelings that are secondary emotions of or occurring in response to shame and guilt. Identify how often you feel shame and what triggers it. Learn your shame scripts and that of your alters if it applies. Disrupt your scripts with counter arguments and rationalizations. I find that for us, DBT skills like wise mind and opposite action really work for this. Work on establishing safety and stabilization. And when you are safe, start working on being more vulnerable with others. This can be done through talking about shame and feelings of shame, especially with your therapist, and eventually begin talking about the source of this shame. Find others who relate to your experiences. Learn that you're not alone to help increase your self-empathy and understanding for what you're going through. Increase self-empathy for yourself and for your system, even bad alters, because having shame towards alters still impedes healing and prevents them from doing their jobs and from interacting in everyday life and healing from your trauma experiences. Remind yourself of times when you did good, unshameful actions like helping others. Deal with healthy, realistic guilt by accepting your failabilities and making realistic appraisal of the things that you've done wrong. Accept that you will do wrong, and that's okay, so long as you learn and grow from your actions and act with the best intent in the future. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. I hope this somehow increased your understanding of the topic, or even just how one person understands how shame theory works for them. And thank you for joining us on our journey to healing.